From the Citizens Bank Studio, welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show. Hope you're having a great day as I think about what this wonderful state of Mississippi is all about, why it's such a great place to live, work, and play, and so many incredible people working across this entire state to make it such a great place to live, work, and play. Thinking really long and hard about my friends in the Mississippi Delta, especially the farmers that have had to really endure some very challenging economic times. And in fact, the second half of the show, we're going to have publisher Scott Coopwood join me from Cleveland. And he recently purchased the Mississippi Business Journal. We've had him on to discuss that. But we're going to talk about, the plight of the Delta farmer and some of the other things that are happening in his world. I think I'm really looking forward to that show coming up in the second half. And I thought, no matter where you are in Mississippi, you gotta pay attention to hurricane season. I think if one thing came out as we celebrated the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, certainly not celebrating Katrina, but the recovery from Hurricane Katrina, is the fact that Katrina wasn't just a coastal storm. It in fact affected the entire state of Mississippi. I remember one of those great visuals that Governor Barbie used to show was a satellite view of Mississippi in the day after Hurricane Katrina, and the entire state of Mississippi was in the dark. So, the conversations about the tropical situation isn't just a coastal Mississippi story, although folks in coastal Mississippi are going to pay a little bit more attention to it. For regular listeners of this show, you already know this, but I'm kind of a tropical weather nerd. I usually am posting about, potential threats and kind of what the latest is. But this has been an unbelievably quiet season. And I got to thinking, what do the hurricane hunters do? I think what you're going to find out is when there's a hurricane threatening the places like Hawaii, they're engaged. You wouldn't think from here in coastal Mississippi, they'd be engaged all the way over in Hawaii. Of course, you've got storms that threaten Mexico. You've got storms that could have potentially threatened the East Coast. They're busy. The Gulf of Mexico has been quiet. Direct continental United States hits has been quiet, but the hurricane hunters have been, as usual, busy and training and do all they do as it relates to that. So I'm thrilled actually to have back on the show my friend, Lieutenant Colonel Sean Cross. He's a pilot with the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, and he has a bunch of hurricane eye penetrations over his career that we've talked about in the past. Sean, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, Ricky. Thanks for having us back on. Always good to talk to you.
Yes, it's good to see you too. As we were talking about before the show started, it's been a quiet continental United States season. I always do it looking at some of the outlooks for the rest of the season, and NOAA, Colorado State University, and others still think that we're going to have some real activity in the latter part of September into October. Of course, we all know that hurricane season runs into November. You're anticipating that it's probably going to get pretty busy, at least based on what the experts are saying, aren't you?
Well, I'm not going to say I'm anticipating, but it's kind of like the quiet before the storm right now, or the calm before the storm. It's like we haven't had much going on since Aaron. Of course, they were extremely busy during Aaron. I mean, that was a powerful storm. They flew that a lot out of St. Croix. But, we've been busy up to like 2 days ago, flying Hurricane Kiko out of Hawaii. So, I mean, that's quite an operation to undertake. It takes 2 days to get out there. 65 people total with the crew members and the maintainers and staff and all that. And they've got to load up on 3 aircraft and push all the way to the West Coast. And, it's quite a debacle to handle, but I mean, we've done it for a long time. I tell people all the time, all we need is an internet connection, and we can operate this as long as we got a runway to land on. We can do it. We can keep the parts in the back of one of the aircraft, and that's our storage. So there's all kind of ways to operate. What was interesting about Kiko is we were also flying Lorena off the west coast of Mexico at the same time. So the first 2 aircraft took off, went to the West Coast. They spent the night in Northern California at Travis Air Force Base. And the 3rd aircraft took off about the same time, but they went and investigated Lorena, flew 5 hours in the storm or whatever it was. And then they had to recover to Northern California. And then the next day, all 3 aircraft head out to Hawaii. So it is literally a traveling road show. So, I mean, it's a lot to deal with. let's say you have a maintenance problem in Lorena. When you land at Travis Air Force Base, if the parts you need is all the way in the front container, it's like unloading a car. They got to download all these giant part containers just to get to that piece so they can make the repair to move the aircraft westbound. And they'll fly the Storm Kiku. They flew it all the way until it was no longer a factor, until it was just past the islands. Once they do that, it becomes post-tropical, whatever. Then they come on back. And it takes 2 days to get home. So whenever they go to Hawaii, it's a week-long trip. There's no other way around it.
When you think about the role of hurricane hunters, this is such a fascinating conversation to me, that out of Keesler Air Force Base, you're of course, what we talked about St. Croix before. I'm assuming you're still able to position some parts in St. Croix, get kind of operating base station that you fly the Caribbean. I can't imagine flying across the Atlantic. You and I have talked about this before, but my goodness, man, it feels unnerving to me to fly across the Atlantic Ocean into a Category 5 hurricane out in the middle of nowhere, and then fly your way back to St. Croix. Wow, man. I mean, that's why I call you guys heroes. What you do is so important to us, but I think people don't understand what it takes: the planning, the practice, the coordination, the support. My goodness, man, you guys have your hands full right out of Keesler Air Force Base.
Yeah, one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle that people aren't aware of are diplomatic clearances. So obviously, everyone in the Caribbean is interested in what we do, and they want our information. So part of that agreement with these foreign countries is to get that diplomatic clearance. We call it DIP clearance for short, to where we can fly right up to their beach, because most countries is 12 miles out, sovereign territory, so you can't penetrate that. So we have to get agreements that we can fly right up to the beach, and obviously our information is shared with them. Cuba has a 32-mile clearance range, so we get a DIP clearance with them. It's not blanket year-round, but when we have a storm, we'll give it the State Department. We'll notify them, look, we're going to have to punch right up against the coast there, and they'll work with them. And they're very cooperative. They really are. They've always been that way, and we'll fly right up to the beach. We'll take a fix of a storm or whatever and come back out. And they've been very, very easy to work with, because, everyone has an interest, no matter who you are. When a storm is building, they want to know what's going on. They're curious. So everybody's helping each other when it comes to tracking these storms. They really are. And that's something that we have to do year round to keep up with those clearances. Yeah,
that's kind of fascinating to me, especially as it relates to Cuba. But all the Caribbean states, including Cuba, have a really good plan in place to make their people safe. They've gone through this drill many, many, many times, but you can think the hurricane hunter information and the work of the National Hurricane Center, how your information is feeding into them, and how they're saving lives way beyond America. It's a great role that you play, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle here, and we're out there the first ones gathering the data. I just did this, the 20th anniversary. There was a lot of stuff going on here on the coast for Katrina, and I was asked to speak at the Armed Forces Retirement Home. It was myself, Jim Cantor from the Weather Channel, General Spraggins, and there was a lady who was working at the retirement home when it hit, and she had to deploy up to D.C. for, I think it was like 2 years after. And it was Jim Cantori said something. He goes, what's really interesting about this is the important role that the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance plays. He says, the data that they extract from the inside of the storm, the belly of the beast, is like the most crucial part that we have for forecasting these hurricanes. And it's true. To this day, they can get ship reports. There's some buoys out there and stuff, but the only way to find that lowest center of pressure is to put a manned aircraft inside, drop a SONT, and fix it via lat long, and then report all of that back to the National Hurricane Center, Miami. That's, with all the technology we have today, that's still the best way to do it.
Well, a lot of people are sort of know Jim's story from the Weather Channel doing such a great job of capturing it. Obviously, it had a crew there, but his the truck that they had pre-positioned went underwater. He sort of shifted from being a guy reporting about the storm to helping to save people. But what an incredible story he tells.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I spent a lot of time with him that Friday. Did some live interview stuff on the Weather Channel and all, and then we presented to the group, and he was telling a story about how much easier it is to operate now for the media because they really just operate off of a cell phone. They connect through it somehow. Back then, they had the truck with the big dish on the top, and he said the only regret he really has about Katrina was that they lost that truck. And if he could have continued filming, just put the camera on a shelf to just capture what was happening, he said it would have been fascinating. He would have had hours of footage to share with the rest of the world, but we just didn't have the technology. And that was 20 years ago. And how far we've come now. I mean, look what we're doing right over the internet right now. I mean, we're in 3 different locations, tapped in at the same time. So it's amazing how far we've come. And once we get this broadband internet on the aircraft to where we can share our radar presentation real time with the National Hurricane Center in Miami, that's just another piece of the puzzle that's going to help these scientists really figure out what's going on inside these storms. So we're really looking forward to getting that going.
Yeah, I mean, I live in a unique spot because even when there are storms threatening here, and when they're not, I see those Hurricane Hunter aircraft flying over my house, and I get this constant reminder of this group of heroes, the support team, the pilots, and otherwise. It's a great stuff. When we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Sean Cross. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. As I said at the beginning of the show, hurricanes aren't just a coastal Mississippi story or a concern or something we should prepare for only. It's a Mississippi story, and we're very lucky. I don't think, Keesler Air Force Base plays so many important roles. Good Lord. Their training mission is among the top in the Air Force. I can't say enough about that. But the fact that the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, the Hurricane Hunters, is located there, and as we just mentioned, man, they're flying out deep into the Atlantic, deep into the Pacific, and they're protecting many, many countries beyond the United States by feeding the information they're gathering into the National Hurricane Center that gives some of the most precise measurements about where a storm might hit. We're getting better about intensity. The models are getting better. And the National Hurricane Center is very dependent on the work of the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Mission. So I'm thrilled to have Lieutenant Colonel Sean Cross with us today. But you think about Katrina. One of the things I mentioned on my show, one of the things I remember so well after Hurricane Katrina was, for a period of time, the storm was supposed to go in at the Florida Panhandle, but then the model started to kind of inch over. And then the path of the storm didn't change until late on Friday. And what that unleashed in terms of mandatory evacuations and syncing up New Orleans with Mississippi and all the massive work that had to be done. They ultimately got the path mostly right, but it took a little bit of time to get that. If you think about advancements over the last 20 years, we've gotten a lot better, haven't we, Sean?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's improving every flight. Every time we get a little more data and they plug it into the models, it's just law of averages. It just gets tighter and tighter. And the supercomputers have improved tremendously. The forecasting is really strong. But, you still deal with Mother Nature, and you just never know what kind of curveball she's going to throw at you. But you look at some of these websites and these models, and it's like 10 days out, and you can just see this stuff coming across and developing and turning. And then 6 days later, you look at the news and it's like, where did this come from? And it's developing and it's turning. It's doing just like you say. So the forecasters and the science behind this and the technology is just greatly improved. Ricky, I don't know if you've ever seen my presentation that I do. It's about 45 minutes. I talk all about the history. I go all the way through the mission, how we do it. It's really, I go all over the coast, all over the Southeast. I've got invites to go all the way up to the Northeast in the spring. And I talk about the Great Galveston Hurricane, which the anniversary just passed. That was almost 120 years ago. And it's fascinating to think back where we were. And there was no warning systems, no radar. We didn't even have radio, you know what I mean? And it was just a newspaper and the town crier, if you know what that is. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, but a lot of young kids don't. And you just had to get the word out and talk. You imagine what it's like to be on a front porch when all of that stuff's bearing down, and you have no idea what's happening or what's coming over the next 5 or 6 hours. Now
Yeah.
I mean, we know right where it's going to hit pretty much. I mean, they can, as it gets closer to land, the forecast that cone gets tighter and tighter. So you've got days of warning and preparation time to get ready. And emergency management officials, they love it, because if they can only evacuate Hancock County instead of Hancock and Harrison County, and you're talking well over $1 million mile of evacuation costs. I don't even know what that number is today, but I just know it's over $1 million. That's a big savings. So, and it keeps from clogging up the interstates and all that. It makes a huge difference. So we feel really strongly about it.
The Galveston storm I've studied in great detail. In fact, the former mayor of Gulfport, Brent Warren, and I actually went over to Galveston after Hurricane Katrina to talk about our experience. You know, there's a lot of that sharing that has gone on over the many years. That's what you're doing as well. I think about my friend Reed Geis, whose parents, Wade and Julia Geis, saved so many people as civil defense directors for Harrison County and Biloxi, during the Hurricane Camille experience. And, here was Reed, sort of ironically, almost tragically, at his house on Back Bay with waves, tearing his first floor apart, up on his second floor, not knowing if he was going to make it. I thought he died. And it was not until a few days after the storm that he walked into the Sun Herald, and I saw that he actually lived. But he was on my show recently, and one of the points that he made, what made me think about this was the Galveston storm. But he read a poem that he wrote about how people have already forgotten Camille, and there's a powerful lesson here that we should never forget, especially a storm like Camille, a storm like Betsy, a storm like Katrina. We can never forget those, because it's from those storms we learn incredible lessons about how each storm is different. And those two storms are the same. I remember A.J. Holloway was famous for saying after Hurricane Katrina that Camille killed more people in 2005 than it killed in 1969, because people made decisions to stay at their homes based on that Camille experience. But it's so true, isn't it, Sean? And I think part of your presentation is about, never losing sight of these lessons that we've learned over time.
Yeah, and that's why I go out and give these talks all over the place. It's the reason why we lost so many in Katrina is exactly what you just said with A.J. Holloway. It's because of a lady named Camille. People have this false sense of security. I made it through Camille. I'll be okay in Katrina. And look, I know where Reed Geis lives. Okay, another friend of mine lived right down the street from him. And a bunch of people in the neighborhood hunkered down in a house that made it through Camille. And the guy I know left, went back to his house. They thought it was over. It was just getting started. And I mean, next thing you know, he's riding it out on the roof of his house. So you have to pay attention. And I try to really beat this up and drive it home is, don't lock Katrina in a box. Okay, you've got to pull her out and talk about her every storm season. We've got to educate the youth. We've got to fill them in. And the survivors of Camille, you've got to share your stories about Camille every year, because as we get farther and, at the time, old Father Time's catching up with all of us, right? So you got to tell these stories. You got to share this information, because if we don't, the generations behind us, they're not going to be able to prepare, because it may be 30, 40 years before they see anything. They may never see one. And then they've got to prepare their children. What I'm really concerned about, Ricky, is the amount of people that are moving into the Southeast from all over the country, and they have no clue what this is all about. You and I grew up in it since birth. This is all we've ever known. I've never lived north of I-10, so I've dealt with it from New Orleans all the way across into Florida. So I get on edge every time this year, same time. So these other people moving in, we want to see it. I'm like, no, you don't. I said, this is not fun. It's a horrible situation, but you just have to deal with it and get through it one day at a time, clean up as much as you can, and you just move to the next project, and you just keep going. Well, it just doesn't stop.
There are people listening. Yeah, Sean, there are people listening to this show from other parts of Mississippi who have family and friends here on the coast. And I think one of the things we learned at the Sun Herald, that some of the people who perished lived here and their family and friends lived somewhere else. And so when everybody's got a role to play. So if you live in the Mississippi Delta or in Northeast Mississippi or in Jackson, and you have family here, especially older folks, it's important when we're getting threatened to know when to call them and check on them to make sure they get out. A lot of people didn't get out because they didn't have someone urging them to get out. And we told the stories of every single person who perished during Hurricane Katrina. And it was so sad hearing each of those or reading about each of their, personal decisions to stay. It was just an incredible thing. Hey, I went to one Katrina event. And one of the things I was struck by, I got to see a lot of the folks I worked with in the governor's commission and so on. But one thing I was struck by is how many young leaders and young people were there. And either they weren't here during Hurricane Katrina or they don't remember it, or their experience of it was just as a child. We've got work to do. This poem that Reed wrote about Camille and us forgetting Camille is important. And your point is extremely important, that we do have work to do to make sure people know that there's reasons to get out and listen to the authorities when they tell you to get out. Boy, I can't stress that enough, can I?
Yeah. No, you're right. You hit the nail on the head. And I'm going to worry. I'm retiring within the next 3 years. Who knows when they're going to push me out the door. And that's my biggest thing. I'm a good salesman on this presentation. I don't know who's going to pick up behind me and do it, but when you live through it, you fly through it, you live through it on the ground, you see everything destroyed that you're trying to, build up in life and everything, you become very passionate about it. I'm very passionate about talking about it, and I try to share it as much. But you nailed it. These young leaders, I mean, they were probably young teenagers. So they just really don't remember,
We got about a minute left. You flew through Hurricane Katrina. But remind us how many eyes you've penetrated as a pilot.
Oh, I don't have that many compared to some. I've only got 176. So, I mean, it is a lot. But, I mean, there's guys and girls in the squadron that have passed me up. They're still going. Doug Gotro, one of the weather officers, he's well over 200 right now. I think the record, Rick Cumbo, he retired a year or two ago. He had over 300. So, I mean,
wow.
You can rack them up. Yeah, if you're available and you like to fly, you can rack up some penetrations pretty quick. So, and they got some in Hurricane Aaron.
Yeah, that's not a record that I'm looking for. So, I am going to go out and fly where you want, so I'm definitely going to do that.
We got to get you. We got to get you airborne.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to do that for sure. Listen, Lieutenant Colonel Sean Cross from the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance, the Hurricane Hunters. It's been a pleasure to spend some time with you, my friend.
Yeah, same here. Let's catch up again in a month and see where we stand.
Y'all keep up the good work. I'll see you in a month, man. I hope it's quiet. God bless you, my friend. Hey, when we come back, Scott Coopwood is going to join us. We'll see you after this break.